My daughter-in-law emptied my late wife's savings account 3 days after the funeral. She smiled at me over the casserole dishes the neighbors brought and said Carol would have wanted her to have it. I said nothing. 2 weeks later, I handed her a folder. She assumed it was the deed to the house. She said, "Finally, you're being reasonable, Dad," until she opened it. I'd been a high school history teacher for 31 years in Dayton, Ohio. Retired at 63 with a pension, a bad left knee, and a filing system my wife used to tease me about. She said I kept receipts like other men kept grudges. She wasn't wrong. Her name was Carol. She died of a pulmonary embolism on a Tuesday in November, 11 days after our 41st anniversary. She was there in the morning. She was gone before lunch. That's the part nobody prepares you for. Not the grief, the speed of it. My son brought his wife to the funeral. They'd been married 4 years. I'll call her my daughter-in-law because that's what she was, legally. Personally, I'd had my doubts since the rehearsal dinner, when she spent 20 minutes explaining to my sister why the centerpieces were wrong. But she was my son's choice, and Carol had made me promise to be fair. So I was fair. My son, I'll call him my son, because that's what he is, even now, stood beside me at the graveside and held my arm when my knee gave out on the uneven ground. He wept at the service. I believe that was real. He'd adored his mother. Whatever happened later, I hold on to that. 2 days after we buried Carol, my daughter-in-law asked me about the house. We were in the kitchen. She was loading the dishwasher with other people's casserole dishes, and I was sitting at the table drinking coffee that had gone cold. She didn't look at me when she asked, just kept loading. "Have you thought about what you're going to do with this place? It's a lot of square footage for one person." I said I hadn't thought much about anything yet. "Of course," she said. "Of course. We've been thinking about starting a family, and this neighborhood is wonderful." I told her I was 67 years old, and I'd lived in that house for 22 years, and I wasn't ready to have that conversation. She smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Absolutely, whenever you're ready." 3 days later, I got an alert on my phone. One of those banking notifications Carol had set up years ago, and I'd never bothered to understand. Joint savings account. A transfer. $16,400. Gone. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. I pressed the notification, looked at the destination account, didn't recognize the number. Called my bank. Spent 45 minutes on hold. When a woman finally answered, she walked me through it. The transfer had been authorized using Carol's online credentials. The computer flagged nothing because Carol's account had been accessed from Carol's phone. My daughter-in-law had Carol's phone. She'd offered to return it to the carrier for us, save us the trouble. My son had handed it over. I thanked the woman at the bank, hung up. Made myself a cup of coffee. I didn't call my son. Not yet. Carol had a younger sister down in Columbus. I'll call her my sister-in-law, though she feels more like my sister after all these years. She called to check on me that evening, like she did every evening that first month. I almost told her. Instead, I asked if she'd spoken to my daughter-in-law lately. Pause on the line. "She called me last week," my sister-in-law said carefully. "She asked if I knew whether Carol had a life insurance policy separate from your joint one." I set down my coffee cup. "What did you tell her?" I said I didn't know, which is true, but Ray. She stopped herself. "My name isn't in that list. I'll tell you that much. Why are you asking?" I said I was just trying to get my paperwork in order. That night, I went into my home office. The filing cabinet Carol teased me about. 31 years of organized folders. I pulled out 5 years of bank statements, our joint investment account records, Carol's personal account history, and a yellow legal pad. Sat at my desk until 2 in the morning writing down a timeline. Every loan my son had asked for since the wedding. Every investment opportunity. Every conversation where money came up and something felt slightly off. The total surprised even me. $62,000. Over 4 years, in amounts small enough that I'd never sat down to add them up. I looked at the number on the legal pad for a long time. In the morning, I called an attorney, a woman I'd met through the teachers' union back in 2009 when the district tried to restructure our pension. Sharp, methodical, the kind of person who used the phrase, "Let me stop you there," and actually meant it. I told her everything. The transfer, the phone, the loans, the conversation about the house. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have documentation?" I looked at my filing cabinet. "I have everything." She asked me not to confront my son or his wife. "Not yet. Let her review the materials first." "Build a picture," I agreed. It was the hardest thing I've done. Because my son called that afternoon to check on me, and his voice sounded like himself, and I wanted more than anything to believe that he didn't know, that she'd done this without him, that the boy who held my arm at his mother's grave wasn't part of it. I said I was fine. I asked about his week. I said nothing about the $16,000. The materials went to my attorney in a banker's box. Bank records, printed text messages, a handwritten log I'd kept for 2 years of every time money was mentioned and what was said. Carol had taught me that habit, actually. She kept a household log going back to 1987. Grocery prices, repair costs, what the plumber charged in 1994. I used to tease her about it. Now I was glad. My attorney called me back in 4 days. "This is more than a civil matter," she said. "The account access was unauthorized. Using a deceased person's credentials to transfer funds is wire fraud. That's federal." I asked her what we should do. "That depends on what you want. You can file a civil suit for recovery of the funds. You can take this to law enforcement and let them investigate. Or both." I said I needed a few more days. What I needed was to know whether my son knew. I drove to their house on a Thursday afternoon. My daughter-in-law's car was in the driveway. My son's wasn't. I knocked. She opened the door in workout clothes, slightly startled to see me. "Dad, I didn't know you were coming." "Just in the neighborhood," I said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. I came in. We sat in their living room. Nice furniture. Nicer than a preschool teacher's salary and a mid-level project manager's salary should afford. I'd thought that before. Never said it. I asked her how she was holding up. She said it had been hard, losing Carol so suddenly. She said Carol had been like a mother to her. Her eyes filled, and I watched them fill, and I thought about a woman who had worked 30 years as a dental hygienist and saved 63 cents out of every dollar she earned so that we'd have something to leave our grandchildren someday. No grandchildren had come. But the savings had. We talked for about 20 minutes. I mentioned casually that I'd been going through the financial accounts, getting everything sorted. She nodded. "It must be overwhelming." "It is. Actually, there's one account I can't quite reconcile. A transfer that went out a few days after Carol passed. Do you have any idea what that might have been?" The nod stopped. "What account?" "Joint savings. About 16,000. She said nothing for 4 full seconds. I counted. "I think that might have been funeral costs. We covered some things on our card." I said our son had told me he paid nothing, that I'd reimbursed him personally for the flowers. She said she wasn't sure, she'd have to look at the records. I said I'd appreciate that. I thanked her for the coffee she hadn't offered me and left. In my car, I sat for a moment. Then I drove home and called my attorney. "File both," I said. It took 3 weeks to build the full picture. My attorney found 2 things I hadn't known about. First, my daughter-in-law had contacted our investment broker 2 weeks before Carol died, identifying herself as Carol's daughter and asking about the process for adding a joint account holder. The broker hadn't proceeded, but the email existed. Second, a woman in their church. My attorney tracked her down through a friend of my sister-in-law. Retired schoolteacher, 71 years old, lived alone. My daughter-in-law had befriended her about 8 months earlier, volunteered to help with her grocery shopping. The woman had updated her will 6 months later, left $30,000 to my daughter-in-law personally. Not to the church, not to a charity, to her, citing a close personal friendship. The woman had no children, didn't know my daughter-in-law had a husband, didn't know my daughter-in-law's husband had a father who kept files. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my sons. Not about the money, not yet. I asked if he could come over on Saturday, said I needed help with some things around the house. He came. We fixed a gutter that wasn't broken and had lunch at the kitchen table, and I watched his face. He seemed tired, he seemed stressed, but he seemed like my son. After lunch, I said I wanted to show him something. I spread the bank records on the table. Just Carol's account, the transfer. His face went still. "I don't understand," he said. "I think you do," I said. "Or maybe you don't. That's what I'm trying to figure out." He stared at the document. His jaw moved. He picked up the paper, set it down. She said it was for the funeral costs. There were no funeral costs that weren't paid. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the neighbor's dog was at it again. Same dog. Always something to bark about. How long, he finally said. How long what? How long have you been? How long have you known? I told him. All of it. The phone. The broker inquiry. The woman from the church. I watched him absorb it in pieces, the way you watch someone receive news their body doesn't want to accept. He put his head in his hands halfway through. He didn't try to defend her. He didn't try to explain. I sat there and took it. When I finished, I asked him a direct question. Did you know? He looked up. His eyes were red. Not about Mom's account. Not about. I knew she borrowed money from you. I thought you'd agreed to it. She said she'd cleared it with you. She never cleared anything with me. He looked sick. The other woman, from the church. I didn't know about that at all. I believed him. I still believe him. I want to be clear about that, because what happened next wasn't about punishing my son. It was about stopping something that would have kept. My daughter-in-law had no idea any of this was coming. My attorney had advised me to let law enforcement and the civil proceedings do the work. Don't tip her off. Don't engage. Let the process run. I agreed. I was better at following instructions than my attorney expected. 2 weeks later, we filed civil suit for recovery of the funds, and we gave the documentation about the church woman to the district attorney's office, along with the wire fraud evidence. My daughter-in-law was served at her workplace. A process server arrived at her school. She was a preschool teacher, which is something I haven't let myself think about too hard, and handed her the civil complaint just before her afternoon class. My son called me that evening. He'd been with her when she opened the documents at home. She'd told him it was a misunderstanding. She'd called it a misunderstanding. He told me his voice was very quiet. She's saying it was a loan. That you agreed. I said, I have 30 years of receipts. I have 2 years of bank logs, documented every conversation we ever had about money. Ask her to show you one piece of paper that says I agreed to anything. He was quiet. She can't, I said. He came over the next morning, without her. We sat at the kitchen table, and he cried for the first time since his mother's funeral. Not the controlled grief of a graveside. The ugly kind. The kind that comes when everything you thought was true turns out to be constructed. I made him eggs. I sat with him. I didn't say anything that couldn't be unsaid later. He asked me if I was going to send his wife to prison. I said that wasn't my decision. It was the DA's, he said. But you gave them the evidence. I said yes. Long silence. She had me fooled too, he finally said. I know, for 4 years. I know. He looked at the photo of Carol on the refrigerator, the one from their anniversary trip to Savannah 3 years ago. Carol in a yellow dress, laughing at something off camera. She would have handled this better than me, he said. She would have made you eat something first, I said. He almost smiled. Almost. What I hadn't expected was the woman from the church. She called me. Got my number through my sister-in-law somehow. Her voice was small and sharp at the same time, the voice of someone who'd learned not to be surprised by the world but was surprised anyway. She said she didn't know what to do about her will. She said she genuinely liked my daughter-in-law, thought she was kind. I said, she probably was kind. That's not always the same as being good. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how did you know where to look? I told her about the filing cabinet, about Carol, about 31 years of teaching kids that the evidence is always in the details. She said, your wife sounds like she was a wonderful woman. I said she was. We talked for about an hour. She was updating her will, she told me. Her niece in Portland would benefit instead. She had a dog named after a president. She'd seen Carol's favorite movie, some Cary Grant picture, and thought it was overrated. I liked her very much. The civil suit was resolved 6 months later. My daughter-in-law agreed to a settlement rather than go to trial. Full repayment of the $16,000 from Carol's account, plus reimbursement of legal fees. The criminal matter was still pending when the settlement was signed. She entered into a deferred prosecution agreement, no jail time, but supervised probation, restitution of $22,000 to the churchwoman's intended beneficiaries, and a fraud conviction that would sit on her record permanently if she violated the terms. She and my son separated in February. The divorce was filed in April. He moved back into his old room for a while. The one where he'd had a poster of a baseball team on the wall and a collection of basketball cards in a shoebox under the bed. I didn't change anything in there after he left for college. Carol said I was sentimental. I said I was organized. He slept in that room for 3 months. We watched games on the couch. He ate my cooking and pretended it was better than it was. I let him. Mornings he'd come down, and I'd already have the coffee going, and we'd sit at the kitchen table with our mugs and not say much. Sometimes I'd tell him something about his mother, not the grief, the small stuff, the way she alphabetized the spice cabinet, how she kept a list of every book she'd ever read going back to 1978, how she'd talk to plants, specifically, not generally, like each one had its own personality. He wrote some of it down. He didn't say why. I didn't ask. My sister-in-law came up from Columbus in March. We sat on the porch with blankets and coffee, and she told me stories about Carol I hadn't heard. Stories from before I knew her, and I stored all of them away carefully, the way I'd stored everything else. She said, "You know Carol would have pressed charges too." I said, "I know." She said she would have felt terrible and done it anyway. I said, "That's right." My knee had gotten worse over the winter. The orthopedist recommended a replacement. I scheduled it for June after the legal matters were fully resolved. Didn't want to be sedated when there were decisions to be made. My son drove me to the pre-op appointment. He sat in the waiting room with a book he wasn't reading and drove me home and made me dinner that was better than he let on. He'd learned to cook somewhere. His mother would have been pleased. One evening in May, sitting in the living room, he asked me a question he'd been holding for a while. Was it worth it? I looked at him. He was thinner than he'd been, older looking. The way grief and betrayal age a person faster than time does. Was what worth it? All of it. The filing, the lawyers, going after her. I thought about Carol's savings. 30 years of 63 cents on the dollar. I thought about the woman from the church who'd trusted someone and had her kindness used against her. I thought about whatever other women in whatever other churches might have come next. Your mother died thinking her money was safe, I said. I wasn't going to let that be a lie. He nodded, looked at the carpet. She never knew, he said. No, she didn't. Is that better or worse? I'd thought about that more than he knew, at 2 in the morning with my legal pad, on the drive to Columbus for depositions, in the quiet of the kitchen with cold coffee and a dog barking in the distance. I think it's neither, I said. The truth doesn't need her to have known it. It just needed to be true. He was quiet for a while. I keep thinking about the 4 years, he said, how I didn't see it. She was good at what she did. That's not a character flaw in you. That's a skill seen it maybe. But you're here now. He looked up at that. She used to say that, he said. Mom. When I messed up as a kid. She'd say, you're here now, that's what counts. I didn't say anything. I didn't realize you heard her say that. I heard everything she said, I said. For 41 years. You don't just stop hearing that. He stayed through the summer. By August, he'd started looking at apartments closer to his job. He found something in a neighborhood with a coffee shop he liked and a hardware store he walked to on weekends, because apparently the hardware store was how he unwound, which was something I'd never known about my own son. He moved out on a Saturday. I helped him carry boxes even though my knee wasn't ready for it. When we were done, he stood in the empty room and looked around at the baseball poster and the carpet that hadn't been vacuumed in 30 years, and he said, "Thank you for everything." I said he was welcome. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I said, "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. We can both carry that." He hugged me. First time in probably 15 years that it was a real one, not a shoulder pat at a holiday dinner. His mother would have cried. I kept it together until his car turned the corner, and then I let the kitchen be quiet for a while. The woman from the church sent me a Christmas card in December. A simple one, no glitter. Inside she'd written, "Some people protect what they love by keeping records. Your wife trained you well." She'd included a photo of her dog. He was enormous. The president she'd named him after, I thought, would have been flattered. I still have the card. It's in the filing cabinet, in a folder labeled with her first name. Carol would have thought that was exactly right.